My daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye across a dinner table I paid for, in a house I paid for, and said, "You're not welcome at this table." 14 words. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I stood up, walked to the basement, opened the electrical panel, and I shut off every breaker in that house. Then I walked out into the dark. Let me back up. Because that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was built, carefully, piece by piece, by everyone I loved. 3 years ago my son Michael married a woman named Claire. I didn't choose her. I didn't get a vote. Nobody asked me anything. Michael brought her home one Tuesday night and said, "Dad, this is Claire, we're getting married." He was 26, she was 24. They'd known each other 4 months. My wife Linda looked at me across the couch, that look. The one that said, "Don't you dare." I said, "That's great, son." What else was I going to say? The wedding happened 3 months later. September, outdoor venue, 200 guests. Linda planned the whole thing with Claire's mother, a woman named Patricia who had opinions the way other people have, breathing, constant, unavoidable, suffocating. I paid for everything, $42,000. Because that's what I do. I pay. I've been paying my whole life. It's the only language my family understands. But the wedding is where I should have seen it coming. 2 days before the ceremony, Patricia called Linda. I was in the kitchen. Linda put it on speaker because she always put Patricia on speaker. She wanted witnesses. Patricia said, "Linda, I think Richard should sit in the back row at the ceremony. Not in the front with the family." Linda said, "Why?" Patricia said, "Claire's father passed away 6 years ago. It would be emotional for her to see an older man in the front row. It might trigger her grief." Claire's father had been dead for 6 years. She'd processed it. She'd talked about it openly. This wasn't about grief. This was about position. Patricia wanted to erase me from the visual story of the wedding. Linda looked at me. I shook my head. Linda said, "Patricia, Richard is the father of the groom. He sits in the front row." Patricia said, "He can sit in the second row. It's not a demotion, it's just sensitivity." Linda said, "He'll be in the front row." Patricia didn't argue. She just said, "Fine, but I want you to know Claire is very particular about the photos." Photos. She wasn't worried about grief. She was worried about pictures. She didn't want me in the family photos because I wasn't family. Not to her. I was the bank. Day of the wedding. I'm in my suit. Linda is adjusting my tie. My daughter Emily is helping Michael with his cufflinks. Everything looks fine. Then Patricia walks up with Claire. Claire is in her dress. Beautiful, I'll give her that. She looked at me and smiled. A real smile. I thought we were okay. We weren't. The ceremony starts. I'm in the front row, Linda next to me, Emily beside her. Patricia is across the aisle in the front row on the other side. She's not even looking at the altar, she's looking at me, with this expression, not anger, assessment, like she's measuring something. Vows are said. Rings exchanged, kiss, applause. Then the photographer starts arranging people for photos. Patricia walks over to the photographer. I hear her say, "The family photo, just the bride's side first. Then we'll do the groom's side separately." The photographer says, "Usually we do both families together." Patricia says, "Not today, Claire wants it this way." Claire walks over. She looks at the photographer and says, "Can we just do my mom's side first, then Michael's side, then the two of us alone?" Michael is standing right there. He looks at Claire, then at his mother, then at me. He says, "Claire, my dad should be in the family photo." Claire says, "He will be, in your family's photo. I just want one with just my mom's side, that's all." It wasn't all. Because after the bride's side photo, after the groom's side photo, after the couple photo, the photographer never took the combined family photo. Nobody called for it. Patricia redirected him to table shots, cake shots, dancing shots. And I stood there in my suit with my wife and my daughter while the photographer walked away. Linda said, "Where's the big family photo?" Patricia walked past us and said, "Oh, we ran out of time, sorry." She wasn't sorry. She'd orchestrated the entire timeline to make sure that photo never happened. I didn't say anything. I drank my scotch, I sat at my table, I smiled when people talked to me, but Emily saw it, my daughter. She came up to me during the reception and said, "Dad, that was messed up, are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. 3 months after the wedding, Michael and Claire moved into a house. I bought it for them. $300,000. Cash. Because Michael was a teacher, and Claire worked part-time at a gallery, and neither of them could qualify for a mortgage that would get them anything better than a shoebox. I didn't buy the house in my name. I bought it in Michael's name. It was a gift. A generous gift. The kind of gift that comes with invisible strings whether you want them to or not. Claire knew I bought it. Michael told her, but the way Patricia told the story to her side of the family, according to Emily who heard it from Claire's cousin at a holiday party, was different. Patricia's version: Richard insisted on buying the house so he could control them. He's one of those men who uses money to keep his thumb on everyone. That wasn't why I bought it. I bought it because my son needed a home and I could afford it, and that's what fathers do. But Patricia's version became the truth in Claire's world, and once it took root, nothing I could do would pull it out. 6 months into the marriage, first Thanksgiving at Michael and Claire's new house. I brought a bottle of wine, Linda brought a pie, Emily brought flowers. We walked in and the table was set for 6. Patricia was already there, Claire's brother Marcus was there, his wife, Claire's grandmother. 6 seats. Exactly 6. No extra chair, no extra plate. Linda counted the settings, I saw her do it. Her jaw tightened. I said, "Looks like we're short a couple of places." Claire said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I miscounted. Let me grab some chairs." Patricia said from the head of the table, "There's room at the kitchen counter, someone can sit there." She was looking at me when she said it. Michael said, "Mom, grab a chair from the basement. Dad and Linda can sit at the table." Claire said, "Michael, it's fine, we'll just squeeze in." But Patricia had already set the narrative. The kitchen counter. For me, the man who bought the house. Linda said, "I'll sit at the counter. Richard, you take my place." I said, "I'll sit at the counter." And I did. I ate Thanksgiving dinner at a kitchen counter, while Patricia sat at the head of a table in my son's house, and told stories about Claire's childhood. Michael came to the counter twice. Once to apologize quietly. Once to bring me more turkey. He was embarrassed. I could see it in his eyes. But he didn't say anything to Patricia. He didn't correct the seating. He just whispered sorry, and went back to his wife. Emily sat at the table but she didn't eat. She pushed food around her plate, and glared at Patricia the entire meal. On the drive home Linda said, "If you don't do something about that woman, I will." I said, "What do you want me to do?" She said, "I want you to be a man about it." It sat in my chest like a stone for months, because Linda had never spoken to me like that before. And I realized she wasn't just angry at Patricia. She was angry at me, for sitting at the counter, for taking it, for being the kind of man who could be put at a kitchen counter in his own son's house. She was right. But being right about that didn't fix anything. Christmas came. We hosted at our house. Patricia came. Of course she came. She never missed an event where she could assert dominance. She brought a gift for Michael. Expensive watch. She brought a gift for Claire. Cashmere scarf. She brought a gift for Linda. A candle. For me. A $6 bookmark from a bookstore clearance bin. She handed it to me with a smile and said, "I know how much you love to read, Richard." Michael laughed, nervously. Claire didn't laugh at all. She watched my face. I opened it, looked at it, said, "Thank you, Patricia." Linda took the bookmark from my hand after Patricia walked away. Read the price tag still stuck on the back, $4.99. She put it in the trash. Nobody saw her do it. Except me. January. Claire got pregnant. Michael called me at work. He was excited, genuinely excited. He said, "Dad, you're going to be a grandpa." I said, "That's wonderful news." He said, "We're telling everyone at dinner Sunday. Can you and Mom come?" I said, "Of course." Sunday dinner. At Michael's house again. This time Patricia had arranged the table differently. 8 seats, enough for everyone. A place card at each setting. I picked up my place card. It said Richard in Patricia's handwriting. She'd written everyone's name. My seat was at the far end of the table, the corner, farthest from Michael and Claire who were in the center, farthest from the head where Patricia sat again. Emily looked at her place card, then at mine. She picked up both cards, swapped them, put me closer to the middle. Patricia saw her do it. She said, "Emily, I had a system." Emily said, "Your system sucked." Linda kicked Emily under the table, but I saw Linda smile, just for a second. Dinner was tense, but manageable. Claire announced the pregnancy. Everyone congratulated them. Patricia cried. Real tears, I think. With Patricia it was always hard to tell. After dinner, I was in the living room alone. Patricia came in, sat down next to me, too close. She said, "Richard, I want us to be friends." I said, "Okay." She said, "I know you feel like I've been cold to you, and maybe I have been, but it's only because I'm protective of Claire. She's been through a lot." I said, "I understand that." She said, "The thing is, Richard, and I'm saying this as a friend, not an enemy, you need to let Michael figure things out on his own. You buying that house, you paying for the wedding, It creates a dynamic where Claire feels like she owes you something. And that's not healthy for a marriage. There it was, the framework, the narrative she'd been building since day one. I wasn't a generous father, I was a threat. My love was a transaction, my presence was a debt. I said, "Patricia, I bought that house because I wanted my son to have a good home. There were no strings attached." She said, "I believe you believe that," and she walked away. I sat there for 10 minutes thinking about what she'd said. And the worst part was that somewhere underneath her manipulation there was a sliver of truth. Not about my intentions, but about the effect. My money had created a power dynamic. Not because I wanted it to, but because Patricia had weaponized it. I was the weapon, and I didn't even know it. March. I got a call from Emily. She said, "Dad, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to freak out." I said, "What?" She said, "Marcus hit Lisa." Lisa was Marcus's wife, Claire's brother, Patricia's son. I said, "What do you mean he hit her?" Emily said, "I was at their place last week. I saw a bruise on her arm. She tried to hide it, but later when Marcus went to the store she told me. She said it's been going on for 2 years. Dad, she's terrified." My stomach dropped. I said, "Does Claire know?" Emily said, "Lisa thinks Claire suspects but doesn't want to admit it, because it would mean admitting her perfect family isn't perfect." I said, "Does Patricia know?" Emily said, "Of course Patricia knows. Lisa told her. Patricia told Lisa to pray about it, and to stop provoking him." I didn't sleep that night. The next day I called Lisa, she didn't answer. I texted her, she texted back, "Please don't tell anyone. Marcus will kill me." Not figuratively, the way she wrote it. I believed she meant it literally. I didn't tell anyone. I should have, I know that now. But Lisa begged me. And I was already losing my son's family to Patricia's control. I was afraid that if I pushed on Marcus, Patricia would cut me off from Michael and the baby completely. So I did nothing. And that decision haunts me every single day. April. Linda and I had a fight, the worst one in years. It started because I mentioned Lisa. I told Linda what Emily had said. Linda's response was not what I expected. She said, "You're not getting involved in that." I said, "A woman is being beaten." She said, "That's Patricia's family, not ours. You start poking around in Patricia's family, and she will make your life even more miserable than she already has." I said, "Since when do we care what Patricia thinks?" Linda turned on me. She said, "Since Patricia controls whether we see our grandchild." "That's since when? You think I don't know what's happening? You think I'm blind? That woman has been systematically pushing us out of Michael's life for 1.5 years. And your response is to poke the bear? To go after her son?" I said, "Lisa needs help." Linda said, "Lisa needs to call the police, not you. You are not the hero of everyone's story, Richard. You're just the man who pays for things and then wonders why nobody respects him." That last line. It came out of her like she'd been holding it for years. Decades, maybe. I said, "Is that really what you think of me?" She said, "I think you've spent our entire marriage trying to buy love because you don't know how to earn it. And I've spent our entire marriage watching you do it and being too tired to stop you." We didn't speak for 3 days. May, Michael called me. He wanted to talk about the baby's room. He was excited about painting, choosing colors. He asked if I could help him build a crib. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Saturday morning, I drove to his house with my tools. Claire opened the door. She was showing now, 5 months. She looked beautiful and tired. She said, "Michael's in the garage, the wood's in there." I walked through the house to the garage, and I saw it. On the kitchen counter. A document. Face up. Patricia's handwriting. It was a list. Titled, "Things to Discuss with Michael." The list included, talk to Michael about life insurance. Who is the beneficiary? Find out if Richard added Michael to his will yet. Discuss setting up a trust for the baby, in Claire's name only. Not Michael's. Research grandparent rights in this state. Can Richard force visitation? Grandparent rights. She was researching whether I could legally force myself into my own grandchild's life, as if I was a threat, as if I was someone who needed to be managed through legal barriers. I picked up the list, read it 3 times, put it back exactly where I found it. Michael came into the kitchen, saw me standing there, looked at the counter. He said, "What are you looking at?" I said, "Nothing, let's go build that crib." We built the crib in 4 hours, sanded it, stained it. It was beautiful. The best work I'd ever done. And while we worked, Michael talked about the baby, about his job, about how tired Claire was, about how Patricia had been staying over more often to help. He said, "Mom's been great actually, she's been cooking for us, cleaning, Claire really appreciates it." I said, "That's nice of her." He said, "I know you two don't always get along, but she really does mean well, Dad." Mean well, the woman who put me at a kitchen counter on Thanksgiving, who gave me a $5 bookmark for Christmas, who was plotting ways to keep me away from my grandchild. She meant well. I said, "Michael, can I ask you something?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Are you happy?" He stopped sanding, looked at me, said, "What do you mean?" I said, "With Claire, with the marriage, with how things are you happy?" He went back to sanding, said, "Yeah, Dad, I'm happy." But he didn't look at me when he said it. June. Linda and I went to therapy, one session, just one, because Linda said if we didn't go, she was leaving. The therapist asked us to describe our marriage in one word. Linda said, "Exhausting." I said, "Quiet." The therapist asked me when I'd last felt close to Linda. I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer was so long ago it felt like another life. The therapist asked Linda the same question. Linda said the year Emily was born. After that, Richard checked out. Not financially, never financially, but emotionally. He started replacing himself with money. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Because she was right. After Emily was born, I threw myself into work. I was already making good money, but I started making more. And more. And every problem in our house got solved with a check. Emily needed braces. Check. Linda wanted a kitchen renovation. Check. Vacation. Check. Anniversary gift. Check. I thought I was providing. Linda thought I was hiding. We never went back to therapy. July. The baby shower. Hosted at Patricia's house. I wasn't invited. Michael told me about it a week before. He said, "Dad, it's just for the women. Claire's side, Mom's side. You know how it is." I did know how it was. It was another event where I didn't exist. Emily was invited. She went. She called me from the parking lot afterward. She said, "Dad, I have to tell you something, but you're going to be upset." I said, "What?" She said, "At the shower Patricia made a toast. She said, and I'm quoting, 'This baby is going to be so loved, and so protected, from anything and anyone who might try to use it as leverage.'" Silence. Emily said, "Everyone knew who she was talking about. Claire knew. Linda knew. My mom knew. Nobody said anything." I said, "Did Linda say anything?" Emily said, "Mom looked at her plate. That's it. She looked at her plate." I hung up the phone and sat in my backyard for 2 hours. August. The baby was born. A boy. Named Andrew. After Claire's father. Not after me. Not after my father. After Claire's dead father. The one who Patricia had used as an excuse to move me to the back row at the wedding. Michael called me from the hospital. He said, "Dad, come meet your grandson." I went. I held that baby. He was tiny and warm and his fingers wrapped around my thumb, and I felt something break open inside me that I didn't know was sealed. Was in the bed. She looked at me holding Andrew, and for a brief moment she smiled at me. A real smile, like the one at the wedding. Before Patricia had started working on her, she said, "He has your eyes, Richard." I said, "He has your father's eyes." She said, "Maybe both." Patricia was in the room. She heard the exchange, and I saw something flicker across her face, something fast and dark, like a shadow passing over a window. She said, "He has the Morrison eyes, that's for sure." Morrison, Claire's father's last name, not mine. I handed the baby back to Claire, visited for 30 more minutes, left, September. 1 year since the wedding. Andrew was 1 month old. I went to Michael's house on a Sunday afternoon. Unannounced. I knew I should have called. But I'd been calling for weeks, and Claire always said it wasn't a good time. Andrew's fussy. Andrew's sleeping. Claire's tired. Next week. So I just showed up. Patricia's car was in the driveway. I knocked. Michael answered. He looked uncomfortable. He said, "Dad, hey, what are you doing here?" I said, "Came to see the baby." He said, "Now's not a great time. Patricia's here helping Claire with..." From inside the house, Patricia's voice. Loud, deliberate. Loud enough for me to hear through the open door. She said, "Michael, who is it?" He said, "It's my dad." Pause. Then Patricia said, "Oh, well, Claire just got Andrew to sleep. And we're in the middle of something. Can he come back another time?" Michael turned to me. His face was red. He said, "Dad, can you maybe call first next time?" My own son, asking me to call before visiting my grandson, because his mother-in-law said so. I said, "Sure." I got back in my car, drove home, walked into my house. Linda was in the living room reading a magazine. She said, "How was it?" I said I wasn't allowed in. She put down the magazine. I said, "Patricia was there. She told Michael to send me away." Linda's face went hard. Not sad, hard. She said, "That's it, I'm calling her." I said, "Don't." She said, "Richard." I said, "Don't, because if you call her she'll spin it. She'll tell Michael you're attacking his wife's family, and then Michael will side with Claire, and then we lose everything." Linda said, "We've already lost everything, don't you see that? We have no access to our grandson. Our son calls us only when he needs something, and you sit here like nothing's wrong." I said, "What do you want me to do?" She said, "Fight." October. I started fighting. The way Linda wanted. I called a lawyer. Not for divorce, for information. I wanted to know my rights as a grandparent. The lawyer told me something I didn't expect. He said, "Richard, in this state, grandparents have limited rights. But since you bought that house, there might be a case that you have an established relationship with the child. How often do you see Andrew?" I said, "I've seen him twice since he was born." He said, "Twice in 2 months?" I said, "Yes." Long pause. He said, "That's going to be a problem. The court looks at the existing relationship. If you've only seen the child twice, it's hard to argue you have a bond that needs legal protection." I hung up, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Powerless. Completely powerless. November. Thanksgiving again. Linda said, "We're not going." I said, "We have to go." She said, "Why? So you can sit at the counter again? So Patricia can humiliate you in front of everyone?" "No, I'm done." Emily called. She said, "Dad, are you going to Michael's for Thanksgiving?" I said, "Your mom doesn't want to go." Emily said, "I'll go with you. I'm not letting Patricia run this family anymore." We went. Linda stayed home. Emily and I walked into Michael's house. The table was set. 12 people. Patricia's side, Claire's friends, Marcus and Lisa. Lisa had a bruise on her wrist. She wore a bracelet to cover it. I saw it anyway. Emily saw it too. She squeezed my arm. The table had place cards again. This time my card said Richard in Claire's handwriting. My seat was at the end of the table. Not the corner, the literal end, the last chair before the wall. Like an afterthought. Emily looked at the card, looked at me, picked up both our cards, put them in the middle of the table. Patricia said, "Emily, those seats are assigned." Emily said, "Assigned by who?" Patricia said, "By Claire." Emily looked at Claire. Claire looked at Michael. Michael looked at his plate. Emily said, "Claire, did you assign these seats?" Claire said, "My mom helped me." Emily said, "Great." So Patricia assigned them, and she put my father at the end of the table like a stranger. At Thanksgiving. In the house he bought. The room went silent. Patricia said, "Emily, this isn't the time." Emily said, "When is the time? Because I've been watching you treat my father like garbage for over a year and nobody says anything. Mom doesn't say anything. Michael doesn't say anything. Dad doesn't say anything. Well, I'm saying something. This is wrong." Patricia's face was stone. She said, "Emily, you're young. You don't understand family dynamics." Emily said, "I understand that my father paid for this house, this table, and the food on it. And he's sitting at the end like he's not welcome." Claire stood up. She said, "Emily, stop. You're causing a scene." Emily said, "I'm not causing a scene. I'm ending one." I put my hand on Emily's arm. I said, "It's okay. Let's go." Emily said, "Dad." I said, "Let's go." We left. Drove home in silence. When we got home, Linda was waiting. She'd made dinner for 2, just her and me, plates on the coffee table, no tablecloth, no place cards, just food. She said, "How bad was it?" I said, "Emily defended me." Linda looked at Emily. Something passed between them. A look that said more than words. Linda said, "Good." December. Christmas. We hosted again. Patricia came, Claire came, Michael came, Andrew was there, 4 months old. The first time I'd seen him since September. I held him. He'd grown. He was chunky now, laughing. He grabbed my finger and I felt that thing again, that breaking open. Patricia watched me hold him. She didn't say anything, but she positioned herself between me and Claire the entire evening, physical proximity like a bodyguard. When it was time for gifts, Patricia had brought presents for everyone, expensive ones for Michael, a laptop, for Claire, a designer bag, for Linda, another candle, for me, a book. A thick biography of Winston Churchill. Nice book. But when I opened it, a piece of paper fell out. A receipt. From a used bookstore. $7. She'd left the receipt in there. On purpose. I looked at Patricia. She was already looking at me. And she gave me the smallest smile. The kind that says, I can reach you anywhere. I put the receipt in my pocket. Said thank you. Moved on. After everyone left, Linda found the receipt in my jacket. She held it up. Said, she's taunting you. I said, I know. Linda said, and you're going to take it? I said, what do you want me to do? She said, I want you to stop being a victim. January. 3 months into the new year. Things had been quiet. Too quiet. Michael called me once a week, but the calls were short. Claire was always in the background. I could hear her voice. Never speaking to me, speaking to Michael, whispering. One night Michael called and said, Dad, Claire thinks we should see a marriage counselor. I said, that's probably a good idea. He said, the counselor asked about our families. About boundaries. Claire said she feels like you don't respect her boundaries. I said, what boundaries? He said, coming over unannounced, calling too much, making her feel like she owes you something. There was Patricia's language again. Boundaries. Owing. The vocabulary of control dressed up as therapy. I said, Michael, I came over one time unannounced, one time, in 6 months, and you sent me away. He said, I know, but Claire felt. I said, Claire felt what Patricia told her to feel. Silence. He said, Dad, don't do that. Don't blame my wife's mother for our problems. I said, I'm not blaming her for all of your problems. I'm blaming her for the ones she's causing. He said, I have to go. Andrew's crying. He hung up. February. Emily called me at work. She was crying. I said, what happened? She said, Lisa is in the hospital. My blood went cold. Emily said, Marcus beat her last night. Bad this time. She's got a broken arm, 2 fractured ribs. Patricia is at the hospital right now. I said, is Lisa going to press charges? Emily said, Patricia is telling her not to. Patricia told the nurses that Lisa fell down the stairs. I said, she fell down the stairs. Emily said, that's what Patricia told them. Lisa was unconscious when the ambulance came. Patricia got there first. She told the EMTs that Lisa was clumsy, always falling. I sat at my desk. My hand was shaking. I said, where are you? Emily said, I'm in the parking lot of the hospital. I can't go in. If Patricia sees me, she'll know I told you. I said, go home, I'll handle it. I hung up and called the hospital. Asked for Lisa Morrison's room. The nurse said, are you family? I said, I'm her uncle. She said, only immediate family is allowed right now. Patricia had already set the boundary. I drove to the hospital anyway, sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, didn't go to Lisa's floor, just sat there. Thinking about all the times I could have said something. All the chances I had. And I chose silence every single time. Because I was afraid of losing access to Michael, to Andrew. While I sat there protecting my relationship with my grandson, Patricia's daughter was lying in a hospital bed with broken bones, and Patricia was covering it up. What kind of man does that? I'll tell you. The kind of man who sits at kitchen counters and says thank you for $5 bookmarks and pretends everything is fine. March. The dinner. The one that changed everything. Michael invited me and Linda to Sunday dinner. He said Claire wanted to cook. She'd made roast. She'd set the table. She wanted to do something nice. Linda didn't want to go. I told her I'd go alone if she didn't. She said, fine, I'll go. But if Patricia is there, I'm walking out. Patricia wasn't there, just Michael, Claire, Andrew in his high chair, Linda, and me. The table looked beautiful. Claire had done a good job. Candles, cloth napkins, real plates. Andrew was babbling and smashing sweet potatoes on his tray. For 20 minutes it was nice, almost normal. Michael told stories about his students. Claire laughed. Linda complimented the food. Then Claire said, Richard, can I talk to you about something? The way she said my name. Not Dad. Richard. She'd never called me Dad. Not once. In 3 years. It had always been Richard. I said, of course. She put her fork down, folded her hands, looked at Michael. He looked at his plate. She said, Michael and I have been talking, and we feel like the financial dynamic in our relationship has created some unhealthy patterns. Here we go. She said, we've decided that we want to start paying you back for the house. We'll set up a monthly payment plan, but in exchange, we need you to understand something. I said, what? She looked me dead in the eye and said, you're not welcome at this table. Linda dropped her fork. Claire continued. She said, not just this table. Any table where decisions about our family are being made. You've been overstepping since the day Michael and I got married. You bought our house without asking us. You show up unannounced. You question our choices. You've made Michael feel guilty for taking your money. And we want it to stop. Michael said, Claire, that's not exactly what we agreed to say. Claire said, it's what needs to be said, Michael, you know it is. Michael looked at me. His eyes were sorry, but his mouth was shut. Linda said, excuse me? Who do you think you're talking to? Claire said, I'm talking to Richard, not you, Linda. Linda said, you don't get to talk to my husband like that in his son's house. Claire said, it's not his house, it's Michael's house. Richard's name is nowhere on that deed. Technically true, I'd made sure of that. I bought it in Michael's name, as a gift, and now that gift was being used to lock me out. I stood up. Linda said, Richard, where are you going? I didn't answer. I walked through the kitchen, down the hallway, to the basement door. I'd helped Michael wire this basement when they moved in. I knew every circuit, every breaker, every line. I opened the electrical panel, looked at the breakers, labeled in my handwriting, kitchen, living room, dining room, bedrooms, garage. I shut them all off, every single one. The house went dark, complete dark, except for the glow of my phone screen in my pocket. I walked back up the stairs, through the dark hallway, into the dining room where Claire and Linda and Michael were sitting in confusion. Andrew started crying. Claire said, what happened? I could barely see her. Just shapes in the dark. I said, you're right, Claire. It's not my house, it's Michael's house. And Michael's house runs on electricity that Michael pays for, with money from the job he has in the school district that I didn't buy for him. But the panel, the wiring, the basement I finished, that was me. Michael said, Dad, what are you doing? I said, I'm leaving, like you asked. I walked to the front door, opened it, stepped out onto the porch. Linda followed me. She didn't say a word. She just walked past me to the car and got in the passenger seat. I got in, started the engine, drove away. In the rearview mirror I could see the house. Dark, no lights. Claire standing in the front door, holding Andrew. Michael behind her, looking at the porch light that wasn't on because I'd turned that off too. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel powerful. I felt something collapse inside me. Something that had been holding me up for 60 years. Linda said quietly, you shut off their power. I said yes. She said the baby was in the dark. I said I know. She said that wasn't right, Richard. I said I know. We drove home in silence. When we got home I sat on the back porch. It was cold, March cold. I didn't go inside for 3 hours. Linda brought me a coat and a blanket and a cup of coffee. She sat next to me. She said, you know what the worst part is? I said, what? She said, Claire wasn't wrong about some of it. I looked at her. She said, you did buy that house without asking. You did overstep. You have been using money to stay connected. And Patricia took that truth and twisted it into a weapon. But the truth underneath the weapon was still true. I said, are you taking her side? She said, I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm telling you that the reason Patricia was able to do what she did is because you gave her the ammunition, you handed her the gun, and she pulled the trigger. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me. Linda said, but Richard, shutting off the power, that's not who you are. I said, maybe it is. Maybe that's who I've always been. I just hid it behind checks and gifts and silence. She didn't argue. The next morning, Monday, I called Michael. He didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. I called a third time. He picked up. He said, Dad, what you did last night was insane. I said, I know. He said, Andrew was scared. Claire was furious. I had to go to the basement with a flashlight and figure out which breaker did what. I said, I'm sorry about the baby. He said, are you sorry about the rest of it? I said, no. Silence. He said, Dad, Claire wants you to stay away from the house for a while. I said, how long is a while? He said, I don't know. I said, Michael, is this you or is this Claire? He said, it's both of us. I said, okay. I hung up. 2 weeks passed, no contact. Linda tried calling Claire. Claire didn't answer. Emily tried calling Michael. He texted back, not a good time. Emily called me and said, Dad, I went by the house yesterday. I said, why? She said, because I was worried. I peeked in the window. Patricia was there. She's moved in, Dad, she's living there. Patricia had moved into Michael's house, under the guise of helping with the baby. But really, we all knew really. She was fortifying the position, making sure I couldn't get back in. Emily said, And Dad, there's something else. I saw Lisa there. She was in the kitchen, her arm is in a cast, and Patricia was standing next to her like nothing happened. I said, Lisa went back to Marcus? Emily said, Patricia made her go back. I heard Patricia through the window. She told Lisa that the baby needs a father, and that Lisa was being dramatic. I put my head in my hands. Emily said, Dad, someone has to do something. I said, I know. She said, then do it. April, I did it. I didn't call Michael, I didn't call Claire, I didn't call Patricia, I called Detective Ramirez. The same detective from Sarah's case. Wait, no. That's a different story. Let me be clear. I called the police, non-emergency line. I reported what I knew about Lisa's abuse. I told them about the hospital visit in February, the broken arm, the fractured ribs, Patricia's cover story about falling downstairs. The officer on the phone said, Are you the victim? I said, No, I'm a relative. He said, Has the victim reported the abuse? I said, No. She's being pressured not to by her mother. He said, We can't do much without the victim's cooperation. I said, I understand, but I want it on record. I want there to be a record that someone reported this, so that next time when it happens again, because it will happen again, there's a paper trail. He took the report, case number, everything documented. I also called Lisa, left a voicemail. I said, Lisa, I filed a police report, not to hurt you, to protect you. The case number is written down. If you ever need it, it's there. You don't have to do anything right now, but one day when you're ready, you'll have something to start with. She didn't call back. May, I got a letter from a lawyer. Patricia had sent it. Not to Michael, to me, personal. The letter said that if I contacted any member of Claire's family, including Lisa, in any way, they would pursue a harassment claim. It said I was creating a hostile environment. It said I was emotionally unstable. It used the power shutoff as evidence of erratic behavior. I gave the letter to a lawyer. He read it, laughed. He said, This is a bluff. She can't file harassment for a police report about domestic violence. That's protected speech. I said, But she can make my life miserable. He said, She's already doing that. The question is, what are you going to do about it? June. Linda and I had the real conversation, the one we'd been avoiding for 30 years. We were sitting in the kitchen. Morning. Coffee, no phones. Linda said, Richard, I've been talking to Emily. I said, About what? She said, About us, about this family, about everything. I waited. Linda said, Emily thinks we should separate. The word hit me like a wall. I said, Does she? Linda said, She thinks you and I are poisoning each other, that we've been doing it for so long we don't even notice anymore. She thinks I enable you by staying quiet, and she thinks you enable me by letting me stay quiet. I said, Do you want to separate? Linda looked at her coffee. She said, I don't know what I want. I know I don't want to live like this anymore, where we're both angry all the time, where we can't look at each other without seeing every disappointment, every failure, every silence that should have been a conversation. Said, I never meant to fail you. She said, I know, that's the worst part. You never meant any of it. And I never said anything. And here we are, 30 years later, sitting in a kitchen that you paid for, in a house that you paid for, and I can't tell if I'm grateful or trapped. I said, Maybe both. And she said, Maybe both. We didn't separate, not then. But we stopped pretending. That was the beginning of something. Not better, not worse, just real. July. Michael called. He said, Dad, can we meet, just us? No Claire, no Patricia, no Mom, just you and me. We met at a diner. Middle of the day. Neutral ground. He looked tired, thinner than I'd ever seen him. Dark circles under his eyes. He said, I need to tell you some things. And I need you to just listen. Don't react, don't fix it, just listen. I said, Okay. He said, Claire miscarried last month. I said, What? He said, She was pregnant again. 8 weeks, she lost the baby. And she blames herself because she's been so stressed. And the stress is because of the war between you and Patricia. I didn't speak. He said, I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying the whole situation is broken. And I'm in the middle of it. And I don't know how to fix it because everyone I love is fighting everyone else I love. I said, Michael. He said, You said you'd listen. I closed my mouth. He said, Patricia moved in after you shut off the power. Claire asked her to, and at first it was helpful. But now Patricia runs the house. She decides who comes over. She decides when Andrew eats. She decided that you and Mom aren't allowed on the property. I said, She can't decide that. It's your house. He said, It doesn't feel like my house, Dad. It hasn't felt like my house since the day you bought it, because you bought it, not me. And then Patricia took control of it, and I just live in it. I'm a tenant in my own life." His eyes were red. He said, "I'm a teacher. I make $47,000 a year. Claire works part-time. We have a baby. I couldn't afford that house on my own. I can't afford anything on my own. And both of you and Patricia, you use that, you both use it." I said, "I never meant to." He said, "I know, that's what Mom says about you too. You never mean it, you just do it, over and over, and the rest of us live with the consequences." There it was. Linda's words in my son's mouth, passed down like an inheritance nobody wanted. He said, "Dad, I need you to do something for me." I said, "What?" He said, "Let me fail, let me figure this out on my own. If I lose the house, fine. If I have to move into an apartment, fine. But I need to be a man in my own life, not your son who gets everything handed to him. Not Patricia's puppet, who does whatever she says. Just me, failing or succeeding on my own." I looked at my son. Really looked at him. And I saw myself at his age, trying to escape the shadow of a parent who gave too much and demanded too little. Wanting to be seen as a man, not a project. I said, "Okay." He said, "Okay what?" I said, "Okay, I'll back off, completely. No money, no house, no visits unless you invite me. No calls unless you call first. You want to fail, I'll let you fail. You want to succeed, I'll let you succeed. But Michael, I need you to do one thing for me." He said, "What?" I said, "Get Patricia out of your house." He looked down at his coffee. I said, "She's not there to help you, she's there to control you, the same way she controls Claire, the same way she controls Lisa. She's been doing it your whole marriage and you've been letting her because it's easier than fighting." He didn't respond. I said, "And, Michael, one more thing." He looked up. I said, "Lisa is going to end up dead if someone doesn't help her. And Patricia is the one standing between Lisa and help. You're married to Claire. Claire is Patricia's daughter. That means you have more access to that situation than anyone, and I need you to do what I was too cowardly to do." He stared at me for a long time. He said, "You filed a police report about Lisa?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Claire was furious about that." I said, "Claire can be furious. Lisa's arm was broken by her husband, and Patricia told the hospital she fell downstairs. If Claire is more angry at me than she is at Marcus, then Claire is part of the problem too." Michael put his head in his hands. He said, "I don't know how to fix any of this." I said, "Neither do I, but you can start by going home and asking Patricia to leave." He nodded, didn't commit, but nodded. August, Emily called me with news. She said, "Dad, Lisa left Marcus." I said, "What?" Emily said, "She went to a women's shelter. She used the case number you gave her, the police report you filed. It was enough to get her into the system. She's safe." I sat down. I couldn't stand. Emily said, "But that's not all. Patricia went to the shelter to get her back. The shelter wouldn't let her in. Patricia called the police and tried to have Lisa declared mentally unfit. The shelter had documentation. The police didn't buy it." I said, "Where is Lisa now?" Emily said, "She's in a safe house. She's filing for divorce. She's pressing charges against Marcus." I said, "And Marcus?" Emily said, "Marcus was arrested yesterday, domestic battery, because of your police report. It was on record. When Lisa finally came forward, they had the history. They had the hospital records. They had everything." I put my hand over my mouth, because I was going to cry, and I didn't want to, but my body didn't care what I wanted. Emily said, "Dad, you did that. You made that happen." I said, "I should have done it 2 years ago." She said, "You did it now. That's what matters." September, Michael called. He said, "Dad, I asked Patricia to leave." I said, "How did it go?" He said, "Badly. She screamed. Claire cried. Andrew was in the next room. Patricia said I was ungrateful, that she'd given up everything to help us. Claire took Patricia's side at first, but then I told Claire about Lisa." I said, "What did you tell her?" He said, "I told her the truth, that Lisa was beaten for 2 years, that Patricia knew, that Patricia covered it up, that Patricia sent Lisa back to Marcus, that you filed a police report that saved Lisa's life." He said, "Claire didn't believe me at first. She called her mother. Patricia denied it. But then Claire called Lisa, and Lisa told her everything." I didn't speak. He said, "Claire hasn't spoken to Patricia since that call, 3 days ago." I said, "How's Claire?" He said, "Broken. She keeps saying, 'How did I not know? How did I not see it?' And I keep telling her that Patricia made sure she didn't see it. That's what Patricia does. She controls information. She controls narratives. She did it to you. She did it to Claire. She did it to Lisa. I said, Michael, I'm sorry. He said, for what? I said, for buying that house, for creating the dynamic that let Patricia get her claws in. If I'd let you struggle. If I'd let you figure it out on your own. Maybe Patricia wouldn't have had anything to work with. He said, Dad, Patricia would have found something. That's what she does. She finds the crack and she wedges it open. If it wasn't the house, it would have been something else. Your money didn't create Patricia. It just gave her a tool. I said, can I see Andrew? Long silence. He said, yeah, Dad, come over tomorrow. October. I walked into Michael's house for the first time since March, since the night I shut off the power. Claire met me at the door. She looked different. Thinner, pale. But something in her eyes had changed. The hardness was gone, replaced by something softer and sadder. She said, Richard, come in. Richard. Still Richard. But the way she said it was different. Not cold, not distant. Just what she'd always called me. And for the first time it didn't feel like a wall. Andrew was in the living room, 10 months old, crawling. He saw me and stopped, looked at me. Babbled something. I knelt down. He crawled to me. Pulled himself up on my knee, grabbed my finger. Claire stood in the doorway watching. She said, he doesn't usually go to strangers. I said, I'm not a stranger. She said, no, I guess you're not. We sat in the living room. Michael made coffee. Claire and I talked, really talked, for the first time in 3 years. She said, I need to apologize to you. I said, you don't have to. She said, I do, because I said things to you that were cruel, at that dinner, and before that. And I said them because my mother told me to, not in those exact words. But she planted every single thought in my head. About you being controlling, about the money being manipulation, about you being a threat to our marriage. And I believed her because she's my mother, and why would my mother lie to me? I said, Claire. She said, but she did lie. She lied about you, she lied about Lisa, she lied about everything, and I was her weapon. I didn't know I was a weapon, but I was. Every time I shut you out. Every time I moved your seat. Every time I changed the subject when you tried to connect with Andrew, that was Patricia. Using me. Her eyes filled with tears. She said, and the worst part is, I think she believed she was protecting me. That's what makes it so twisted. She wasn't trying to be evil. She genuinely thought she was keeping me safe. From you. From the world. From anything she couldn't control. I said, your mother is a sick woman, Claire, not in the way people usually mean, but sick in a way that looks like love, sick in a way that destroys everything it touches while swearing it's building something better. Claire wiped her eyes. She said, I'm not ready to call you Dad. I'm sorry. I know that hurts. But I need to be honest. I said, I understand. She said, but I want you in Andrew's life. I want you at this table. The real table, not the end of it, not the kitchen counter, at the table, as his grandfather. I said, I'd like that. Michael came in with coffee, sat down next to Claire. She leaned into him, and for the first time they looked like a team. Not Patricia's team, not my team, their team. November, Thanksgiving. At Michael's house Claire cooked, I helped. Linda was there. Emily was there. No place cards, no Patricia. We sat wherever we wanted. I sat next to Andrew's high chair. He smashed sweet potatoes on my arm and I didn't care. After dinner Michael stood up. He said, I want to say something. Everyone went quiet. He said, last year at Thanksgiving my dad sat at a kitchen counter, and I let him. I watched it happen, and I didn't do anything because I was afraid of conflict. I was afraid of what Claire would think, what Patricia would think, what everyone would think. And I let my father be humiliated in a house that he bought for us. And I've been carrying that shame for a year. Down, he said. So this year, I want to say thank you to my dad for everything, for the house, for the wedding, for the crib, for being there even when we made it impossible, and I want to say I'm sorry for not being the son you deserved. I looked at him, my son, my real son, the one I raised, the one I failed in ways I'm still discovering. I said, you are the son I deserve, that's the point. We don't get to choose who deserves us. We just show up, and you're showing up now, that's enough. Linda was crying. Emily was crying. Claire was crying. And Andrew was just eating sweet potatoes. Completely unbothered. The only one in the room without a wound. December. Linda and I were in bed. Late. Christmas was in 3 days. She said, Richard. I said, yeah. She said, I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear it without getting angry. I turned to her. She said, When Emily was born, I had a brief affair. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent, the kind of silence that has weight. I said, "What?" She said, "It lasted 2 weeks, it was with a coworker, it meant nothing. I ended it, and I've never told anyone." I stared at the ceiling. She said, "I'm not telling you to hurt you, I'm telling you because Patricia knew." I turned to her. She said, "How did Patricia know?" Linda said, "I don't know, I never told anyone. But shortly after Michael and Claire got engaged, Patricia said something to me. In the kitchen at the first dinner at their apartment. She said, 'Linda, we all have secrets. The smart ones keep them buried, the dumb ones let them show.' I asked her what she meant, she just smiled. My mind was racing. Linda said, 'Patricia has known about my affair for years, I don't know how, but she's been holding it over me, that's why I never fought her. That's why I sat at that table and watched her humiliate you. That's why I told you not to get involved with Lisa's situation. Because I was afraid. If I crossed Patricia, she'd tell you. She'd tell the kids. She'd destroy me.'" I lay there, staring at the ceiling. "Processing," I said. "Who was it?" She said, "It doesn't matter." I said, "Who was it, Linda?" She said, "A man named Tom, from my office. He quit 2 months after it happened. I never saw him again." I said, "Did you love him?" She said, "No, I was lonely. You were working 70 hours a week. Emily was 6 months old. I was drowning. And he was there. That's all it was." I didn't speak for a long time. She said, "Are you angry?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Are you going to leave?" I said, "No." She said, "Why?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. I said, "Because I've spent 30 years using money to buy love that I was too afraid to earn. And you spent 30 years keeping a secret because you were too afraid to lose what you had. We've both been cowards, Linda. We've both been hiding. The only difference is that my hiding looked like generosity and your hiding looked like loyalty." She started crying. I said, "I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying I understand why it happened. And I understand why Patricia was able to use it. Because Patricia finds the thing you're most ashamed of and she sits on it. She sits on it until she needs it. And then she leans on it, just enough to make you move." Linda said, "What do we do now?" I said, "I don't know, but we stop hiding. That's where we start. Christmas Day, everyone at our house. Michael, Claire, Andrew, Emily. Patricia was not invited. Claire hadn't spoken to her in 3 months. Patricia had tried calling. Claire had let it ring. Andrew was sitting on my lap, tearing wrapping paper, laughing. Michael was taking photos, real photos, family photos. The kind Patricia spent a year making sure didn't exist. After the gifts, Claire came up to me in the kitchen. She was holding a small box. She said, "This is for you." I opened it. Inside was a watch. Not expensive, not fancy, but engraved on the back were 2 words. It said, "Welcome home." I looked at her. She said, "I've been thinking about what to call you, and I realized that you've been more of a father to me than my own father ever was. Even though you're not, even though I fought it. You showed up. Every time. Even when I made it impossible, and I want to call you Dad, if you'll let me." I couldn't speak. She said, "Is that okay?" I said, "That's more than okay." She hugged me. And for the first time in 3 years, the wall between us wasn't there. Not because I'd broken it down, because she'd chosen to take it down herself. January, Marcus's trial. Lisa testified. Emily testified. I testified. Lisa took the stand. She was thin, nervous, but she was there. She looked at Marcus across the courtroom and said, "He broke my arm. He cracked my ribs. He told me if I ever left, he'd kill me." And I believed him because he'd already come close. Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit her, brought up the fact that she'd stayed for 2 years, brought up the fact that she'd initially told hospital staff she fell. Lisa said, "I told them I fell because my mother told me to. My mother has spent my entire life protecting the men who hurt me, because she thinks that's what family does, protect, no matter what, no matter who gets destroyed in the process." She looked at the judge. She said, "I'm done being protected. I want to be safe." Marcus was found guilty. 2 years, not enough, never enough. But it was something. Patricia was in the courtroom. She sat in the back row. She didn't testify. She didn't speak. She just sat there while her son was led away in handcuffs. When it was over, Patricia walked out alone. Nobody walked with her. Not Claire, not Marcus's lawyer, nobody. I watched her go, this woman, who had terrorized my family for 3 years. This woman who had moved seats at tables and written lists about keeping me away from my grandchild. This woman who had covered up her son's violence and blackmailed my wife. She looked small walking out of that courtroom. Old, defeated, and I felt something I didn't expect. Pity. Because Patricia wasn't born a monster. Something made her. Something I'll never fully understand. And in the end, all her scheming, all her control, all her manipulation, it didn't save her son. It didn't keep her family together. It destroyed everything she was trying to protect. February. Linda and I were in the kitchen. Morning routine, coffee, newspaper, the quiet rhythm of two people who've known each other for 30 years and are finally for the first time being honest. She said, "I made an appointment with a therapist, for me, alone." I said, "That's good." She said, "I need to figure out who I am without the secrets. I've been carrying that affair for 26 years, Richard. 26 years, I don't even know who I am underneath it." I said, "Do you want me to come?" She said, "Not yet, maybe later, but not yet." I said, "Okay." She picked up her coffee, took a sip, put it down. She said, "Richard?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You shut off the power." I said, "I did." She said, "It was the most out-of-character thing you've ever done." I said, "I know." She said, "It was also the most honest thing you've ever done. You couldn't find words, so you found a breaker switch." I almost laughed. She said, "Don't ever do it again." I said, "I won't." She said, "But I understand why you did." And that was enough. March. 1 year since the dinner. 1 year since I shut off the power and walked out. Michael called and asked if Linda and I wanted to come to dinner, Sunday, at his house. I said, "Who's coming?" He said, "Just us. You, Mom, Claire, Andrew, Emily." I said, "No Patricia?" He said, "No Patricia." I said, "No place cards?" He laughed. He actually laughed. First real laugh I'd heard from him in over a year. He said, "No place cards, Dad." Linda and I drove to Michael's house. Walked in. The table was set. 6 plates, no labels, no assignments, just a table. Claire was taking something out of the oven. Andrew was in his playpen. Michael was pouring wine. I sat down. Not at the end, not at the corner, in the middle, next to Andrew's high chair. Claire brought the food to the table, sat down across from me. She looked at me and said, "Richard, would you pass the bread?" Richard. Still Richard. But now it wasn't a wall, it was just my name. And she said it the way you say someone's name when you're comfortable with them. When they belong in the room. I passed the bread, and we ate. Nobody sat at a counter, nobody read a receipt from a used bookstore, nobody made a toast about protecting anyone from anything. We just ate, and talked, and passed the bread. And for the first time in 3 years the table felt like a table. Not a battlefield, not a statement, not a weapon. Just a table, with food on it, and family around it. Flawed, broken, scarred, honest. That's my story. My daughter-in-law told me I wasn't welcome at her table. And she was right, I wasn't, because the table she'd built wasn't hers. It was Patricia's. Every seat, every place card, every whispered conversation. It was all designed by a woman who turned love into control and family into a prison. So I shut off the power. Not because I was strong, because I was broken. Because I'd spent 60 years being the man who pays and takes it and smiles and drives home and sits in the dark pretending everything is fine. And I was done pretending. I lost a year with my grandson. I almost lost my marriage. I almost lost my son. I carried shame and anger and guilt that weighed more than anything I've ever lifted. But I found something too. I found that the truth, no matter how ugly, is lighter than a lie. Even a lie you've been telling yourself for decades. My name is Richard. I'm 61 years old. I shut off my son's power. I changed the locks on my own marriage. I filed a police report that sent my daughter-in-law's brother to prison. And I'd do it all again. Because some tables don't deserve you sitting at them, and some families need to lose everything before they can find what was always there. Hiding underneath the money, underneath the secrets, underneath the place cards and the power plays and the silence, just people, broken people, trying to love each other without knowing how. That's all we ever were.